Dags för nästa breakout-session och vi är jätteglada att ha MobileIron här med oss idag och du kommer få tala själv. You're gonna talk yourself and introduce you in Swedish, but välkommen på scen, mannen som även var konsult åt Mr. Robot, den serien om ni har sett den. En riktigt bra serie, kan jag rekommendera. Welcome up stage, James Plouffe.
Hi everyone, thank you. I apologize, my entire presentation is English because the only Swedish I ever learned was from a Muppet, and I don't think it was that reliable, so I'm not even going to try, but bear with me. So I'm here today to talk a little bit about some of the trends in enterprise mobile security, specifically some of the things that we as MobileIron have observed in our customer base. Just by way of a little bit more extended introduction, I'm a lead solutions architect in our product and ecosystem team, so I spend a lot of my time working with our technology partners to integrate our security and management platform with their security management tools and products. I've been in IT networking and security for about 20 years. I've been a defender for most of that time, and we have this tradition at MobileIron. When you introduce yourself, you have to list some fun facts. You already heard that I work on the television program Mr. Robot. Here are 4 other facts, 3 of which are true and 1 of which is a lie. If you want to know which it is, come see us at the booth after we're done here. We'll be happy to go through any of that. So one of the things I get confronted with a lot is whether mobile security is in fact an issue. I don't know how much traction the Verizon data breach investigation report gets overseas, but in the US it's a very popular thing for people to refer to, and they frequently say, mobile is not a significant source of incidents or breaches. And I would say that may well technically be true, although some of the data that we have certainly suggests that incidents are underreported. But I would also argue that the fact that nothing has happened is not an excuse to let something happen. So I think it's an interesting proposition, but I also think it's something we need to think a little bit more about. I think it also becomes a different conversation when you have something like what happened last week with the WikiLeaks dump of the information about the CIA hacking tools. Now, WikiLeaks claims to be in possession of the entire CIA hacking arsenal. Whether or not that's really the case remains to be seen. Certainly what's been published yet doesn't have a lot of exploits related to mobile, but the point is that nation-state actors are working hard on building and stockpiling zero-day exploits for previously thought secure operating systems, and when those exploits become public, then it's no longer the nation-state actors that you need to worry about. This chart actually catalogs the common vulnerabilities and exposures, or CVEs, for the most popular mobile operating systems. This slide is not intended to start any kind of a debate about which platform is inherently more secure, because CVEs by themselves are not necessarily a very good measure of that. What it is intended to show you is that the trend line is going the wrong direction, which is up and to the right. We're getting more vulnerabilities, not less. Another way of looking at these data points is to group them by severity, and this is perhaps a slightly more meaningful group, but what you can see here is that the trend is also overwhelmingly to more severe vulnerabilities. Interestingly, as different as things are in the mobile security landscape, a lot of the things are fairly familiar, things we've been dealing with for a long time. Vulnerabilities in the devices, for example. So, for as long as there have been operating systems, there have been operating system vulnerabilities. Today we confront things like jailbreak and root. We occasionally also run into specialty sort of device vulnerabilities like application sideloading and things like USB debugging and things that give you access to devices that you wouldn't normally get. We also see application vulnerabilities. No shocker there. Interestingly, we kind of see things break down into 2 different categories when we're talking about mobile security vulnerabilities and apps. You have things that are that put your data at risk. And then finally, unprotected networks. So an interesting thing about access point was, you see there's quite a bit, few sorts of attempted to And so the vulnerabilities there were interesting. There were actually 4 privilege escalation vulnerabilities related to the processor that's in almost 1 billion devices. Thankfully, Google did a lot of great work on the back end there with their Play services to help mitigate a lot of the risk from that. But what was interesting about the quad router vulnerabilities was just the scale. And then finally, we have Dirty Cow, which is representative of, I think, an interesting trend in vulnerabilities we see broadly across both mobile and different software applications, but long-standing vulnerabilities emerging in open source software. So we've seen this with OpenSSL. We see it frequently with the Linux kernel, which is the case here, and I think we'll continue to see that trend emerge as well. But as with sort of the threat landscape, the concerns actually aren't all that different from what we're used to seeing either. So ultimately, we're concerned about attacks that potentially lead to the introduction of malware and result in data leakage. And underpinning all of this is the notion of compliance. So I think many of us would agree that compliance is not the same thing as security, and you can have all of the best blinky light boxes and security tools in the world, and if you can't prove it to your internal and external auditors or the regulatory bodies that govern the work that you do, having those tools doesn't do you a lot of good. We're also dealing with familiar components. We still have endpoints, they're still traversing networks, and they're still accessing data that lives on a server somewhere in a data center, but the behavior is a little bit different in the sense that you may or may not own any one of the components along this path in kind of the modern IT landscape, and that has big implications for your security as well. So with that as our backdrop, I'd like to share some of the information from the MobileIron Security and Risk Review that we just published here in the middle of last month, I suppose. Just a little bit of data that we've gathered from our customers about how things look. The methodology here is pretty straightforward. It's a sample of our 13,500 customers. We compiled this data between October and December of 2016. And one of the big things that we saw is that enterprise app adoption is getting extremely popular. So we saw that nearly 80% of our customers were using 10 or more apps for business purposes. One of the things that we like to do, because it's buzzy, is show which ones are the most popular. And you can see here, the trend is pretty straightforward. You see some remote access, you see some conferencing, some basic productivity apps up here, Concur, which is an expense reporting solution for those of you not familiar, of course, Acrobat Reader, and the Apple iWorks suite. But app security, as I mentioned, can be an issue as well. So the interesting thing about applications is that there are a little over 5.4 million apps in the top 4 commercial app stores. And so that means that finding new tools to help us be productive is very, very easy, but that the bar for software quality might not be quite as high as you want it to. And to that end, we still see folks working on preventing different types of access to their corporate data. So top blacklisted apps, Angry Birds remains the perennial favorite, but we also see broadly in here things like Dropbox, Google Drive, OneDrive. So you see cloud file sync and share services as organizations assess the risk from data exfiltration that way. You also see things that could functionally be back-channel communication, so Twitter, WhatsApp, Skype. And then, of course, you see things that are just going to eat bandwidth, like Netflix, and be huge productivity sinks, like Angry Birds. So looking at some of the things that our customers are doing, we actually saw a big uptick in use of the Apple Device Enrollment Program. For those of you that are not familiar, this is a way for you to tell Apple that you own the devices, that you have corporate liable devices that you're responsible for. And this does some interesting things. It allows you to enable supervision over the air, and enabling supervision over the air gives you some additional restrictions that you can implement, so you have a little bit tighter control than you would with a conventional Apple device that you might go to the Apple Store and buy. We also noticed that most of our customers are still struggling a little bit with keeping on top of security fundamentals. And we think a lot of this has to do with the fact that mobile security is still an emerging discipline in most organizations. And so folks are still kind of finding their footing as they establish policies and procedures to sort of address their mobile fleets. One of the things that we saw was that on average, only 45% of our customers were doing some sort of policy enforcement. So what we mean when we say this is they may have defined a policy, but only 45% were taking some sort of subsequent enforcement action that went beyond a simple alert if that violation, or if there was a violation of that policy. So if you want to, it's probably a little bit of an eye chart on here, but here's the global breakout data there. You can see it's a little bit over, all over the map. Germany had the highest enforcement, UK the lowest, and there's a number of breakouts in between. So we also saw a number of customers with outdated policies. So this is scenarios where devices, an admin had made a change to a security or configuration, and a quantity of devices had not checked in to get the latest update to that policy. You can see here about 29% of customers had that. That's up a little bit from 27% in the previous version of this report. Here again is the sort of generic breakout data. And this one is also very interesting to me, missing devices. So about 44% of our customers had devices marked lost, which I think is always a concern for folks, because once your device has gone walkabout, a lot of interesting things can happen, but you don't really know at that point. And so this is something I think folks need to be much more concerned about. Here again, the regional breakout data. I'm sorry we don't have anything specifically for Sweden. We keep adding regions as we run this report, so expect to see more countries as this report continues to get published. We also saw about 11% of our customers had at least one compromised device. And so what we mean when we say compromised device is a device that was jailbroken or rooted. So this is significant because jailbreak and root essentially undermine all of the built-in security of these operating systems. And so all of the bets that you make about the security capabilities that these devices provide are off when the device has had its operating system compromised. Here again, generic breakout. And then this is actually the one that was, I think, most surprising and disappointing to me, which is enforcing operating system updates. So a lot of these things are mitigated in a fairly timely fashion by the operating system manufacturers, and the timely application of OS updates can protect you from a lot of the vulnerabilities that you see out there. And yet only 9% of our customers are enforcing a minimum OS version. So I think the conventional wisdom in security is that if you're at anything less than N+1, you're probably at great risk. This is a very easy thing to do. Rolling out OS updates, rather, is something that the OS manufacturers have addressed and provide capabilities for. It's an easy thing to enforce, and it gets you a long way toward improving your security posture. So I'm going to wrap up with a few recommendations here. When we at MobileIron think about security, we think about it in terms of what we call multi-layered context, or multi-layered, multifaceted security. And so what we're looking at is both trust as a function of identity and posture, something that is dynamic, and based on the outcome of that analysis, you determine the access level for each of these different areas, whether that's user, device, app, or session. In terms of improving your security posture, we recommend that you broadly control user risky behavior. So things that consists of, you want to ensure, as I mentioned, that you're denying access to corporate resources from compromised devices, because you have no guarantee as to what the state of that device will be, or that any of your other controls will be effective. You also want to prevent or monitor configuration and app side loading. So there's a lot of doom and gloom about mobile malware out there. The reality is that most of it begins very uninterestingly with social engineering and is caused by users installing something that they shouldn't, whether that's sideloading an application from a third-party app store, which is how most of the malware that I talked about earlier landed on devices, or installing something like a malicious configuration profile on an iOS device that contains a VPN profile and a bogus certificate chain that allows people to perpetrate man-in-the-middle attacks. These things almost always start with some form of social engineering, and so if you can monitor for that behavior and prevent it, you're in a much better position as well. You should also take advantage of the security and management capabilities that are offered by the device manufacturer's device ownership program. So Apple has DEP. For devices that support Android for work in the Google world, they have something called device owner mode, and these things give you a lot more controls that you can impose on these devices so that you can lock them down more tightly to align with your risk tolerance and your security policies. Other things that you want to make sure that you're doing, or you can at least consider, you absolutely want to have clear policies about what constitutes compliance and non-compliance for mobile devices, but more importantly, you want to be able to enforce those things as well. You might consider deploying a NAC solution so that you can restrict access to corporate Wi-Fi and other network resources for things that aren't necessarily device aware. You can look at implementing an app reputation or a mobile threat solution that can do deeper analysis of the applications and software that your employees may be loading on their devices. Also requiring OS updates. As I said, this is a very easy but very high value thing to do that can help you improve your security posture. And then finally, this kind of dovetails into adding an app reputation service. Blacklisting is one approach that can help you control application inventories, but ultimately it won't scale because, as I mentioned earlier, with millions of apps out there, it's absolutely impossible to keep up with the features and capabilities of all of them. So at best, you'll get the top most popular, but you'll never be able to hit everything. And so consider substituting your blacklisting policy with something like mobile threat protection or app reputation. So the goal here, of course, is to provide that model for modern enterprise security by allowing trusted users on trusted devices using trusted applications over trusted sessions. I'm right at time right now, but I would love to take questions, so if you want to come see me at the booth after this, I'd be happy to talk to you. Thank you very much.
I think actually we have some time if there's any questions you want to address to James right now.
Oh, all right.
Yep.
Perfect.
Very polite in Sweden, very shy. So
I see that.
well, please reach out to James and the MobileIron team in the booth.
Yeah, we're just over there. Please come see us. Thank you.